Good afternoon or good morning, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Ransomware, Why Are Backup Vendors Trying to Scare You? Today's webinar is brought to you by UTurn, and our speaker today is going to be Mark Jordan, VP of Technology for UTurn. Mark, thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
And before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. First of all, if you have questions, we highly encourage you to ask them because we will be doing Q&A at the end of today's event. And if you'll look in your GoToWebinar control panel, you'll see a handy-dandy questions pane. Make liberal use of that because we will be answering your questions live on the air at the end of the event. Also, if you look in the handout section of the GoToWebinar control panel, you're going to see that there are a number of items for you to, actually there is a single item right now for you to take a look at. This is how to take the ransom out of ransomware. It's a guide brought to you by UTurn. We encourage you to download that and review it at your leisure. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to Mark Jordan, VP of Technology for UTurn, to talk to you about ransomware.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Let's get started. Everyone has probably read these words, right? I mean, I think we've all had to do this in college, high school, the opening lines in the Charles Dickens novel, A Tale of Two Cities. Today we're going to use these words and others from the book to frame a ransomware story that hopefully is fresh, scary, hopeful, and enlightening. Let's start with the worst of times. Some of you may have seen the story this week about the ransomware attack that hit the St. Louis public libraries. Computer services at all 16 branches are down. Person cannot borrow a book or return a book or access computer services. Now, while this may be good for people with overdue books, for those who depend on the library for school or work, who use library computers for job hunting, or who simply enjoy checking out a book to read for pleasure, the impact is pretty immense. In this case, the hackers are demanding $35,000 to restore the system, and the city's refusing to pay. They do not want to give in. They've decided to wipe the entire computer system and rebuild it from scratch, and it's a process that could take weeks. Now let's look at the best of times. Well, almost the best of times, right? The best of times is not getting hit at all. But you have to assume that you're going to, and in case of Bethlehem, New York Central School District, where there's 5,000 students and 800 staff, they've been hit multiple times this past year by ransomware attacks, and in their case, they've been able to quickly recover from backup. They've not paid $1 in ransom. There's quite a contrast between two cities. These are two stories that are being played out all over the world, a story of despair and a story of hope. Ransomware is not a new phenomenon. I know you've been hearing about it in the paper. People have been dealing with it for years. It's been around since 1989. The first virus was created. The first virus that was created was the AIDS malware and was distributed on diskettes that were handed out at a World Health Organization's International AIDS Conference. It was easily overcome, and it was not really until the mid-2000s that new strains of ransomware malware were released where it started to actually do some damage, right? The new releases, they became increasingly difficult to remove. About 5 years ago, the first large-scale ransomware attack started with tens of thousands of ransomware samples detected each quarter in 2011. By 2015, we were seeing organized cybercrime gang activity, attacks on consumers and businesses, infections on PCs, servers, and mobile devices. But 2016 was the year that ransomware really exploded on the collective consciousness of the general public. According to security experts, ransomware cybercriminals took in at about $1 billion last year. This is determined by the amount of money coming into ransomware-related Bitcoin wallets, and some believe this number is low. The U.S. government also estimated that ransomware attacks averaged more than 4,000 per day in 2016, up from approximately 1,000 attacks per day in 2015. So big business and growing fast. We saw ransomware as a service introduced. Ransomware as a service is a variant of ransomware that is so user-friendly that it can be deployed by anyone. Someone downloads the virus either for free or a very low fee, sets a ransom and a payment deadline, and then attempts to trick someone into infecting his or her computer. If the victim pays up, the original author will get his share or her share, 20% usually, and then the rest of it goes to the person who launched the attack. We saw ransomware delivered through multiple ways. You get it off WordPress sites, Word attachments containing infected macros, and we found that ransomware made up about 40% of all spam email in the past year. Even with the FBI's recommendation of not to give in to ransomware demands, an IBM security study that was released in December claims 70% of businesses hit with ransomware paid a ransom to regain access to files. Pretty high percentage. As we just said, the FBI recommends not paying the ransom, and many organizations will not pay out of principle, and the cost of not paying can be high. Here are two companies that did not pay. San Francisco Municipal Transportation Agency was attacked in November and refused to pay a $70,000 ransom. They were down a number of days while restoring their network, and they were forced to let customers ride free over Black Friday weekend. It's hard to predict how many thousands or tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of dollars this cost them. In December, Esports Entertainment Association refused to pay a $100,000 ransom after a hacker broke into their network and stole user data. When ASEA refused to pay, personal information for 1.5 million users was leaked online. And then finally, recovering without paying a ransom will still have a tremendous financial impact, right? The cost of downtime almost always far exceeds the ransom demanded. Delta is a great example. They were down last August, in August 2016, and they had $150 million in lost revenue just for one outage. '17 will be an all-out war, right? Black hats versus the good guys, cyber criminals taking on an industry intent on stopping them. What we'll see is a new level of sophistication on both sides. Some of you probably heard of crypto worms. It's a self-propagating malware. Cisco Talos researchers envision a ransomware strain that once on your network will attack from multiple angles. It'll scan for executable files that are vulnerable for infection. It will look for shared drives and infect any computer that connects to these drives in the future. It is smart enough to cover its own tracks and avoid detection. So that's that's kind of taking it all to a new level, right? Where the ransomware is going to be able to move all through the network, oftentimes moving through the network before you even know it's there. Another fairly new strain of ransomware is called Jigsaw, which starts deleting files if you do not pay the ransom in a timely manner. So to give you a deadline, once that deadline is reached and you haven't started to pay or haven't paid off, it'll slowly delete files until you either have paid off or have lost all of your data. It's estimated that ransoms collected will double year over year until at least 2019. That means if 2016 was $1 billion year, then 2017 looks to put $2 billion in the cyber criminals' pockets. So why is this so difficult to avoid? Because cyber criminals are very good at delivering malware into your environment. During this presentation, we've talked about a number of ways this happens, but number one remains humans being duped or lazy. I mean, we've seen this over the last year or two. We've seen corporations whose information has been leaked. We've seen politicians whose had email leaked. We've seen celebrities who've had their information leaked. Almost all of them were duped by clicking on a link somewhere, going to a website and clicking on that link, or clicking on an attachment in an email, right? We can train end users hours each week, but just by clicking on those email attachments and links, exposes data to ransomware thousands of times every day. By not vigilantly updating applications, operating systems, and firmware and devices on a network, leaves an organization vulnerable. So even those with the best intentions can be exposed. So we'll go back to our Tale of Two Cities quotes, right? How horrible is it to be like the Tale of Two Cities character, Sidney Carton? He's made mistakes, made his life a mess, and he knows it, and he finds himself incapable of overcoming his problem, incapable of his own help. And that's often what we find when some of these corporations or organizations are attacked by ransomware. They simply cannot help themselves because they don't have a way to turn it around. They don't have a way to recover, and they end up having to pay the ransom if they want to get their data back. So why are backup vendors trying to scare you? Because they know backups are a great way to recover from a ransomware attack without paying the ransom. And they also know backups are vulnerable. Backups can help you avoid a ransom, but not all backups are safe. We talked about ransomware looking for shared network drives. Imagine these are what you're using as a backup targets, right? New strains such as Locky are designed to encrypt network shares like central file servers and removable drives that are connected to the computer at the time of infection. The encryption of shared files is a quick way to shut down a full organization. It only takes one employee on the network to execute ransomware, and it can affect the entire company. Cloud backup services aren't immune to ransomware either. Attackers know that organizations are using the cloud to store data and have created ransomware that can infect files in the cloud. Some ransomware strains, including a variant of Verloc, use the desktop sync clients of popular cloud services to access and encrypt files stored in the cloud. For example, if the Google document a person is working on locally gets encrypted, the encrypted file will sync with the Google Drive. Right? And while cyber criminals are looking to exploit all platforms they can, the preponderance of Microsoft Windows systems make them far and away the most lucrative targets. So if your backups sit on a Windows-based target and it's on the network and somehow it's exploited to a point where that particular target is impacted, backups can be gone. You may not be able to recover backups. And the cyber criminals, they're smart enough today now that when they put on a malware that will go out and search your network, it will look for targets of high value. And they know that backups are their highest value target that they want to bring down if they can do that. Maybe you've heard what happened at Hollywood Presbyterian Medical Center. In 2016, they paid the equivalent of $17,000 to cyber criminals. The ransomware didn't just encrypt files, but severely affected operations for. So we want you to be the hero, right? You can be the hero. Be the one who does it right and has a well thought out and tested plan to combat and recover from ransomware. No one expects you to single-handedly stop a multi-billion-dollar criminal enterprise, but you can be prepared when your little spot in the world is attacked. You got to assume you're going to get attacked, and you got to be prepared to fight back. So this is a statement of self-determination from the book Tale of Two Cities, right? Tell the wind and fire where to stop. Don't tell me. In our story today, it is our right to determine if we succumb to cyber terrorists. We have the power to beat them back if we do things right. And I'm telling you, things are getting better. I love this slide. In a little more than a week, we'll experience that great America spectacle, the Super Bowl. And guess what? Both the New England Patriots and the Atlantic Falcons will go into the game with offense and defensive game plans. I should have had a football picture up there, but I couldn't find one, so we got that work. So we have soccer. So assume you're going to get hit and battle ransomware by playing defense and offense. So let's walk through those a little bit. Offense. Start with basic protection, right? Keep your software up to date and train your users to notice potential threats. You're going to use virus detection and antivirus prevention, obviously, but that user education is the most critical. Tell them to avoid clicking on untrusted emails and attachments. Watch out for obvious and not so obvious file extensions. And this is something that you need to do on a continual basis. It's not something you do during a new hire onboarding only. It's something that you're going to be doing on a constant basis because there's always new threats coming out, and you need to keep your end users aware that these threats are coming. Play defense by making your network more difficult to penetrate, right? Disable ActiveX and Office apps and block certain data types and actions. And I know that you've all heard this, and the things that are on this list you may be doing now, but what we found in most ransomware attacks, right, is that organizations get behind. They think they're doing it, and maybe it's not happening. They think they have some protection, and they don't, simply because whatever they've done is out of date. So it's critical that you have a plan, you stick with the plan, play offense and defense, and stay with that plan every day, every week. So even companies playing offense and defense at the top of their game can still be impacted by ransomware. And when that happens, be prepared to recover from backups. And we talked about that earlier in the presentation. There's plenty of companies out there that are getting hit with a ransomware attack that are able to recover from backups and not have to pay a ransom, right? I mean, we see it every day. So pretty easy stuff, right? Yeah, back up your data. That's easy to know. Know your recovery objectives, right? Sometimes people are doing backups, but they don't know how quickly they need to recover. They don't know how much data they can afford to lose, or how many recovery points that they should have. Know your recovery objectives. If you can't afford to be down for more than a couple hours, then you have to have a backup plan and recovery plan that will allow you to use instant recovery, right? So have instant recovery for those systems that have to come back online very fast. Have multiple recovery points. When ransomware is put on a network or on a system, oftentimes it may have a fuse, some sort of a trigger that's scheduled for a date in the future, right? So if you recover to a backup that was taken the previous day before the attack, that malware may still be on the system. So have multiple recovery points so that you can go back to a recovery point before the malware, and that may take a little bit of investigating. It may take a little bit of testing before you find the right one. Get your data off-site, right? There's opportunities for backups to be securely copied to an off-site location where they can be recovered at that off-site location. If you're not using some sort of an off-site target like that, you can put backups on removable media such as disk or tape and take that off-site as well. But get your data off-site so that it's not impacted if your whole entire network in your organization is brought down. And finally, test recovery. I think this is probably the one area that most of the people that I talk to when I'm out in the field and I'm talking to IT directors, this is the one area that everyone knows they need to test recovery, but they probably aren't doing it as nearly as often as they should, simply because they're stretched on time, they're stretched on staff resources, and in some cases they don't even want to know the results that they have to test to recovery. If they have to meet a certain recovery objective, they may know they're not going to meet it, so they try to keep it hidden. But test recovery, absolutely critical. Okay. So how does UTurn fit into this story? So let's walk through that a little bit, right? When I think of UTurn and how we fit into this story, I think of a tale of two worlds. And in our idea of how all-in-one enterprise backup and continuity come into play. And I like to talk about these from an old world, new world perspective, because some of the traditional ways of handling things can have a few extra challenges, and we want to highlight how we're different. For example, most solutions today require you to pull together multiple vendors, which adds finger pointing, more setup, and a lot of manual tuning to get things just right. Sometimes that can mean you're using more products to get to the capabilities that you really need, right? Additionally, with Windows being the operating system used for most backup vendors today, the threat of ransomware impacting all your backups becomes much higher. Backup should be your insurance policy. You don't want to have to fight the same fires with your backups that you do in production. And I saw that I saw something online last night when I was reading a blog post, and it was talking about backups and how you use them to recover from ransomware. And it basically said, if you're going to your backups to recover from a ransomware attack, you're in the ninth inning, meaning that all the other things you've done to try to alleviate the threat and to avoid an attack, and all the other things you've done have obviously failed, and now you're in the ninth inning and you're going to the backups to recover. So if your backups are corrupt or encrypted and you can't recover from them, that's your last at bat, and you don't want to get to a point where you get your last at bat and you have nothing to swing. Okay. And ultimately, the old world concept makes it very difficult to support with high customer satisfaction, which hurts confidence. Contrast that with where we think we play in the new world and the all-in-one approach. We're one vendor, we're really quick to set up, and you have no manual tuning needed because everything is pre-integrated. We have really broad capabilities to cover you locally, at second sites, and in the cloud, with some really advanced automation for recovery that we call recovery assurance, and we'll talk about that more in a bit. And our solutions are a hardened lockdown Linux appliance that aren't as susceptible to attacks as Windows vendors. And finally, we have a 98% customer satisfaction rating for years because it's just one support call. And we've got a couple slides here that kind of hit home on this, right? When you look at backup and DR on the left side of this slide, you might have different vendors and products all the way through the stack, and the stack is more complex now with so many people leveraging cloud-based solutions for offsite backup and failover. We bring it all together into a single vendor and interface, and the hardware and software comes fully loaded in our recovery series appliances and can be optionally integrated with the UTurn's cloud for offsite storage, long-term compliance, and even full failover. The recovery assurance pieces at the top is pretty unique too. It means we'll actually do automated testing of your DR plan every month and send you a report on how we did. You don't have to lift a finger, which is a big part of how we prove we can legitimately provide a 1-hour SLA in our cloud. That's pretty much how we deliver the benefits on the left side, right? And when you talk about customer satisfaction, the whole concept of confidence really hits home when you look at this, right? It's one support call for everything. When you stack up a bunch of vendors that have decent customer satisfaction individually, the multiplier effect overall reduces it for the entire solution. Who do you call first if performance isn't solid? Who do you call if recovery in the cloud didn't work? We simplify that with one support call and a solid 98% customer satisfaction rating for years, right? So I like this slide. It kind of hits home in terms of how that phrase 95% equals 63%. So if every one of those vendors gets 95% and you don't know who to call, ultimately that's 63%. That's a 63% customer satisfaction rating for the entire solution. Let's talk a little bit about UTurn's cloud from an old world, new world perspective, right? Old world, third-party cloud vendors, limited or no DRAS, no recovery assurance, and no SLAs for their customers. We support a number of cloud options, including AWS, Azure, and even Google, right? We also have our own purpose-built cloud for long-term retention and full DRAS. So if you're using our cloud and you're using our DRAS and your network gets attacked, you have the ability to spin up your critical systems in a cloud data center to use those while you're recovering local from the ransomware attack. Okay. So in the UTurn's cloud, you're back to a single vendor. You have a single interface and a single support call. We cover both physical Windows and virtual machines running VMware and Hyper-V. We have full recovery assurance, meaning we'll actually automate testing and prove it all works, and we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a second. And we back it up with a real SLA, not a promise. We give you something in writing. So of course, we also have a great service. We also have a service that includes bulk seeding of data into the cloud to make it easier to get started. So from a cloud perspective, when we look at that new world, once again, it's one vendor, all in one, with 1 hour recover SLA and WAN optimized and rapid data seeding. But really, the thing that truly is kind of the secret sauce, the thing that kind of sets us apart when you look at the old world, new world, is when you think about the old world, we talked about it a little bit ago, recovery testing. You know, you pray that backups can be recovered successfully. You scramble during DR exercises, hardly ever test DR. I can talk to 50 people and maybe 1 or 2 will say they do DR testing on a regular basis. And then you spend hours creating manual DR reports. So now imagine UTurns with our recovery assurance, right? It's fully automated, application level testing and failover. We proactively uncover recovery issues for physical and virtual. So we give it to you in a report. It's a scheduled report, right? You know, and you get a report, and if there's something where you're not meeting the recovery objective that you've set, it'll highlight that, and you can go in and determine why and make adjustments to it. And our recovery assurance is available for local, your own private DR site, or the UTurn's cloud. So it's not just the UTurn's cloud feature. It's something that you can use locally for your local backups. It's something you can use for your own personal DR site if you're using your own personal DR site as a target. And then finally, it gives you that business level DR compliance report. And once again, when you talk to people and they tell you they're not doing a DR testing, one of the major reasons they don't do it is, hey, they don't necessarily want the executives of their company to know what the results are going to be. Now, contrast that with our new world, where you can take that report and every month or whatever the timing is that you run your DR test that's scheduled, you get in on a Monday morning, you have your report in your email box, you take it, you forward it on over to your executives, and it shows that you're in compliance with whatever objectives that the corporation or organization has set. That's the difference between when we talk about old world and new world. So we get to the end of the book, right? And you don't want to be like Cindy Carton, who's one of the main characters in the book, right? At the end of the novel, he sacrifices himself so that others may live. And you don't want to do that. Don't be the tale of the business that could not recover data after a ransomware attack. Don't be the example of a mistake that others learn from. There's nothing noble about putting light on the wrong path, right? So be wise, like the character Lucy Manette. Protect your data, know your recovery objectives can be met, and live. Or keep your job. I think that's probably what we're all trying to do, right? Okay, so we're going to open up the questions here in a second. First thing I'd like to say is, thank you for being on the call today, and I hope that you would follow us on social media. If you go out to Twitter at UTurn, follow us on Twitter, and you can get to everything else. We've got a couple nice contests going up there. You can win some cool prizes, so please go out and follow us. And now I'd like to take some questions. Whoops, let me go back one. Sorry.
We've got some excellent questions that came in from the crowd here. Number one is, oh, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Great. First question is actually sort of interesting, and it's around the original ransomware scenarios that you talked about. Did any of the IT staffs get fired? I mean, I guess the question is, what was this considered a security failure? Was this considered a a learning experience. Do you know what the follow-up was on some of those?
Yeah, it's so funny because they usually don't. They, when you read these stories, right? A lot of these public entities, they've got to say what happened, but they usually don't talk about personnel issues. So I don't know if anyone got fired in any of the examples that I put up today. I do know I've read places where they'll actually go out of their way about 6 months earlier or 3 or 4 months earlier from a Linux-based platform they've gone all VMware and they had a Windows-based platform now, and they got hit, and they were not sending their data off-site, and they lost all their backups. Their backups were encrypted, and they had to pay a ransom, I believe, to get their data back. There's another county right next to it. That's why it was in the same story in the Indianapolis paper. Another county right next to it, same thing happened, but they are using a different backup solution. They had off-site backups, and they were able to recover in the backups, and they had to pay the ransom. Now, in the paper, the county that got hit, they actually blamed their VAR, the integrator who had sold them the solution. They blamed them, and that's the direction they went. So if we have on this call today, if we have any VARs out there or integrators, just be aware that when it comes time for finger pointing, the fingers could be pointed at you as well. But in terms of IT people getting fired, I'm sure that I'm sure some have. I can't give you a specific example, but I am sure some have.
I was part of a replacement IT department at one point for an IT department that's fired for bad backups, but I have not heard of anyone being fired because of ransomware. I suppose that would be an interesting case study at some point.
That's right.
Another question that's really, I think, pretty critical is, what are some of the most common ransomware installation vectors?
Well, I think we went through a few of them earlier, and let me pull up a little list here so that I can talk about them here.
Well, while you're pulling that up, how about if I ask another question?
Sure, that's great.
Sure. Now, when we think about the on-site UTurn's appliances, are you able to do backup verification testing without using UTurn's cloud?
Absolutely. The recovery assurance that we have can be, you can do it on just your local appliance. So if you are just using removable media for your backup copies, you try to get something off site, you can still use the recovery assurance piece on your local appliance to test recoveries locally, right? It'll spin up your backups into kind of a sandbox sort of environment, and it'll test the recovery objectives that you set. Many customers will have their own DR site. Maybe they have 2 data centers, and they're replicating data from one data center to another, and they'll use the recovery assurance in their second data center. So that is that's very common as well. And then of course in our UTurn's cloud, we promise we provide a 1-hour SLA on recovery for the systems that you're going to spin up for DRAS. And the only way that we can prove a 1-hour SLA is using our own recovery assurance product. So that's why we certainly will use it in our own cloud.
Another question that came in is, give us a little bit of details about the types of backups you do. Are they full backups? Are they database specific? Can you just give a brief overview of the types of backups you're capable of doing and how granular you get?
Yeah, sure. One of the things that UTurn has a claim to fame is that we've got pretty broad coverage of operating systems and applications, well over 200, probably somewhere probably 240, 250 when you think about all the different versions. So from a backup perspective, the typical, when you think about what I would call the most common platforms, things like Windows or Linux or VMware, Hyper-V, we're typically going to be using an incremental forever type of backup strategy on those, and And at the hypervisor level backups, we'll do a block-based backup of those VMs using the APIs provided by the hypervisor. For physical backups, backups of physical servers, we have an agent-based backup for those. We still are able to provide bare metal recovery. We're still able to provide a physical to virtual recovery capability, and that's what we use in our own cloud. When you take a physical Windows server and you're protecting it locally and you're copying it up to the UTurn's cloud, we'll do a P2V conversion of that box so that we can spin it up as a VMware VM. You can do it as a Hyper-V VM, so we have that capability. And then, with all the different versions of Linux and Unix out there, I know it's not nearly as, from a market share perspective, it's very small, but we still cover just about any version of our flavor of Unix that you might come up with, and we have great protection for Microsoft or for Apple products as well. From an application standpoint, we agents for the major Windows applications, Exchange, Microsoft SQL, SharePoint, and also we'll protect Oracle on multiple platforms from an agent perspective. Okay.
Another question that it revolves around ransomware here is it possible for modern crypto malware to encrypt cloud-based backups?
It can. One thing you have to understand is nothing is 100% not at risk, right? Nothing's 100%. But there are certain things that are at far more risk than others. When you think about cloud-based backups, we talked about it earlier in the presentation. Some people are actually they're backing up directly to the cloud, particularly end users, or where they have maybe some endpoints and they're using some sort of cloud-based backup where they're kind of doing they're syncing up with a cloud site for files or data. Those certainly are very vulnerable in terms of getting the cloud backups attacked. If you're using when you think about the UTurn's product, it's a little bit different, right? Because we'll be protecting systems, but when we back up the system, it's actually in its own file, right? It's in a file, and it's it's a Linux-based system, so far fewer vulnerabilities when it comes to Linux as opposed to Windows. I mean, Windows is where majority of the world is using, and that's where most money is at, right? So far fewer. But from a cloud-based perspective, yes, there's always a chance, but it's very low if you select the right platform, and if you're protecting data locally, which with UTurn is you're protecting data locally onto an appliance. You then are copying that data to a cloud base. You have multiple recovery points which could take you back before the malware attack happened. All those things will play into making it much safer for you and reducing the risk that you have. I would say that when you're talking about Windows platforms, if you're doing any sort of a shared drive, if the cloud-based backup target is purely a kind of a file syncing location, those going to be much higher risk.
And here's a question, statement and a question. The gentleman says, I have several customers that need this, with an exclamation point. So that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Can any size organizations use the UTurn's tool, or is it designed only for large enterprise clients?
That's a great question, and thank you for asking. One of the things and if you go out to our website and take a look at some of the product sheets, you'll see that we have physical appliances that range in size from 1 terabyte to 180 terabytes in size, and then if you go larger than that, you put multiple appliances in there. So we have a range of appliances that will cover from small businesses up to some of the larger enterprises. So the answer is Don't don't avoid looking at UTurns even if you're a small company, because we have plenty of opportunity or plenty of options for the smaller companies. We also have the ability to take our appliance and deliver it as a virtual machine. So when you deliver it as a virtual machine where it's sized based on the resources that it's protecting, that allows you to even scale down further than the smallest physical appliance. So there's lots of options for organizations of all sizes.
I will add to that, just for, if you don't mind, is I just had a recent, I just consulted, and I just had a client deploy UTurns, and they're a very small organization, and they deployed it because it met their needs and because the price was right. So for what that's worth, that's it's definitely something that's great for small and large organizations, in my experience. Another question is, do you work with your customers in testing their DR, or is this a paid service, or how does that kind of work, if at all?
Yeah, no, that's a great question as well. If they're using UTurn's cloud, they get 30 days. Obviously, the cloud is an annual subscription service, right? But they get 30 days per year as part of that subscription, where they can have their system spun up and running without incurring any extra cost. So typically what that means is that the customer may decide they want to run, maybe they want to run DR tests quarterly or even monthly. So they just have to figure out, how many days they want to take up out of that 30 with their testing, and then if they actually had a disaster, they had to spin it up for production purposes. Knowing that 30 days, you go beyond 30 days, then there's going to be extra fees, but no extra cost unless you get past that 30 days of having the system spun up. From a help standpoint, our support organization, as part of the support contract, they will assist in the test.
And we have another question around testing. And so the question is, can you talk a little bit more about your monthly automated testing processes?
Yeah, and we said monthly, but it doesn't have to be monthly. I mean, if you're using it in your own environment and you want to test every day, you can. I mean, obviously it takes resources, right? It's going to use some storage, it's going to use some compute. So that's why when I say monthly, that's kind of more typical of what we see. But basically, what it allows you to do is spin up virtual machines that you've backed up, VMs. VMware, Hyper-V, or physical Windows servers. It allows you to spin them up in the boot order that you've set in the schedule. You're going to put together like a little boot book that'll boot them up in the order you want, and then you can also have it set to go down and test applications. So it's not just booting them up and taking a screenshot of a Windows login screen and email it to you, say, hey, we're up and going. It'll boot them up in the order you tell it to, and it'll go in and it'll test applications. For example, it can query a database, or it can test the web service, but it can run custom scripts that you design. So there's a little bit of setup involved in terms of putting together your test. But once it's done, then you could put it into a schedule and have it run as often as you want it to run. And then it'll provide to you a report that shows whether or not it could meet the recovery objectives that you had set. Typically, when someone's doing the test, what they'll do is they may have different groups of systems that'll be parts of different tests, right? So you may have one test that's going to bring up systems that run your accounting department, and maybe that's 4 or 5 systems that need to be brought up, and maybe you run that test once a month, and maybe you got another test for some other part of your organization. Maybe you run that once a quarter. So it's really it just depends on whatever the requirements you have for DR. When I talk to customers or with IT directors, oftentimes they'll say they have to run a DR test once a year. So if you want to run it once a year, you can run it once a year. But one of the nice things about the UTurn's recovery assurance tool is that you can schedule to run more often, and that way you can always be assured that you can meet the objectives that your company set.
And I think that's all of the questions that we have right now. If you have any other questions before we end the event, please speak now or forever hold your peace. Is there anything else you wanted to mention, Jordan?
No, it's good. In terms of the different variants of ransomware, I mean, you can go up, and we've all heard of things like CryptoLocker and CryptoWall. I just wanted to bring up a list to try. I wanted to see if what's most common. The only thing that I would say about the variants is that they're becoming more sophisticated. If you think of a number of years ago, you'd see it'd be someone's PC would get locked down, and that still happens all the time, right? Someone will click on a bad attachment. But we have to be worried about today now is the network scanning, where it really goes out and looks for vulnerabilities in the network, and it'll creep through the network and infect as many systems as it can before locking things down, right? So shared drives, and it looks for high value assets and goes after those. So it's much more dangerous now. And you start looking at some of those things like the jigsaw, where it's smart enough to delete like a file at a time while you decide whether or not you're going to pay the ransom. I mean, there's a lot of sophistication out there now. So it's critical that you do something and you protect your data. And once again, I'll just say that backups and recovery from backup, that's your ninth inning, right? It's your last at bat when you're fighting ransomware. So the ability to do that recovery assurance, where you know that you can meet the recovery objectives that you set, that's the one thing that I would hold on to. I want to make sure that you understand that test your backups, make sure that you can meet your recovery objectives. And then the last thing I would say, as we go forward, is that we do have a little New Year's gift from UTurn. So if you go up, follow us on Twitter, go follow us on LinkedIn and some other places, you'll see this up online, where if you want to test the UTurn's product, you can go down and do a trial, download our software, do a trial. You get entered into a UTurn's Dream Lab drawing. So just wanted to throw out that out there as one last little incentive to go to the UTurn's website.
And we also have one other piece of business. We have to give away a $300 Amazon gift card, and today's winner is Henry Chang. Henry will be reaching out to you after the event for information on how to claim your winnings. Thank you to the UTurn team for being here today, and thank you to the audience for being here today. This ends today's event. Thank you once again for attending.